Okay, so today I'd like to talk a little bit more about the idea of hold on to the Matchless Mine and where that comes from. I'm getting ready to leave for Central City. This will be Baby Doe number 6 for me. 7 of the run, I think. I had to miss one, unfortunately, so that's number 6 for me. Um, it's funny, I still keep waking up every time there's a show going, oh my gosh, I get to see Baby Doe today, so I think I thought, seeing it 8 or 9 times, I would get my fill. I would start getting a bit tired. Think, I don't really need to go up there today. That hasn't happened yet. So, and there's only what 2 more after today. So, I guess I'll just keep being excited, which is really nice. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about this idea of hold on to the matchless. Allegedly Horace Tabor on his deathbed tells Lizzie to always hold on to the matchless mine. It'll provide again. It'll look after you. Just hold on to it. Uh, and that, as historians have discussed at length, that seems unlikely. For one thing, it doesn't show up in any of the newspapers around the time of Tabor's death in 1899. There was extensive coverage of his death, and the Tabors were constantly their privacy was constantly being intruded upon. They were very public figures, and so there's no coverage there. There also doesn't appear to be any mention of this in the Tabor papers. Lizzie Tabor wrote extensively after Horace's death for the next 36 years. Historians Duane Smith and Judy Nolte Temple have both pretty much exhausted what there is of the Tabor papers and have found no mention of it. So this does seem to be a later invention. The first time we see hold on to the matchless as an idea is in David Carsoner's 1932 book, which we talked a little bit in the last addendum about the movie and the radio play particularly that were based on that. So Carsoner is the first in print to sort of start talking about this myth that becomes just pervasive to the Tabor story, right? It's been almost a century, and we're still using that as the main thing. That is the folklore around the Tabors. He said, "Hold on to the matchless," and she did. For 36 years, there's always money in the banana stand. Sorry. So Carsoner's the first to print this. Now, I did say in episode 1, of course, that Carolyn Bancroft was the one who made up this story. Carolyn Bancroft said that Carolyn Bancroft was the one who made up the hold on to the matchless idea. It's complicated, as it turns out. So Carsoner's the first to publish that idea in 1932, right? Carolyn Bancroft's book Silver Queen about Lizzie Tabor, she calls her Baby Doe Tabor the whole time. Lizzie Tabor doesn't get published until 1950, so it seems pretty cut and dry, right? Carsoner got there first. Maybe. Probably. In between those two things, 1932 and 1950, there was a series of articles in True Story magazine that started being published in 1938. They purported to be the story of Baby Doe Tabor in her own words. The hold on to the matchless idea shows up in this as well. And this story was written by a woman named Sue Bonney. Sue lived in Leadville in a cabin near Lizzie Tabor and seems to have befriended her in her later years. And she says that Lizzie told her these stories, and this is her story, right? This gets published in serial form over the course of 1938 and is reasonably popular, and it covers all the sort of beats we know of the Tabor story now, right? Including hold on to the matchless mine. Sue Bonney was a real person, and as far as I can tell, did possibly befriend Lizzie Tabor while she was living in Leadville. She, however, did not write this serial. Would you like to take a guess who actually wrote this? Of course, it's our friend Carolyn Bancroft, right? So, a little unclear to me exactly how this came about. In a later edition of Silver Queen, Carolyn Bancroft says the True Story commissioned her to write this story. And I don't know, because the way True Story worked, their whole thing was truth is stranger than fiction. The way they published things, everything was in the first person, and it had to, whoever was writing it, it had to have been told to them directly, was sort of the idea. And maybe that was just a conceit of the format. Maybe they weren't actually that strict about it being someone that the real person that this person talked to, who knows. In any case, Carolyn Bancroft is able to pay Sue Bonney for the use of her name so that she can publish these articles as Sue Bonney. Now, Bancroft herself did meet Lizzie Tabor just the one time as a teenager. Her father was a mining engineer who traveled around the mining camps and had befriended Mrs. Tabor. And so once as a teenager, Carolyn Bancroft was going along with him on his rounds and was in her cabin and spoke with her a little bit. But as she says, she didn't really have an interest in Colorado history at the time. She was fascinated by this old woman and the look of her piercing blue eyes, how eloquent she was, despite the fact that she looked like she might be a little crazy, you know. But she sort of regretted not talking to her further and being able to pick her brain more. So I think she sort of maybe makes up for that later. She does interview Sue Bonney and other Leadville locals about Lizzie Tabor for this serial, and the serial in True Story magazine is what is eventually published as Silver Queen in 1950. So, in terms of our timeline, we've still got David Carstner saying the Hold On to the Matchless in 1932. We've got Carolyn Bancroft saying it actually much sooner than 1950. She's really writing this in 1938. Still not 1932, right? Judy Nolte Temple sort of posits that this is just Carolyn Bancroft claim-jumping Carstner, taking credit for this story, and because she lived longer, she got away with it, right? I think that's pretty funny. I have complicated feelings about Carolyn Bancroft. From what I've read of her, that sort of thing sounds like it would maybe be on brand, so I think Temple's onto something. Duane Smith has another idea, though, that I think is interesting and worth exploring. David Carstner did a lot of his research through newspapers, and particularly through the Post. And Carolyn Bancroft was working at the Post as early as 1928. She was a book review editor, which I think was a position she sort of bullied the editor into creating for her. We're going to do an episode on Carolyn. I love Carolyn Bancroft. She's a trip. But she's also writing historical features for the Post, for their Sunday edition. And so her interest in Colorado history was well known at this time. It seems she may have been considered something of an expert. And so it's not unlikely that Carstner talked to her in the research for his book. Now, he never gives her credit directly. He just credits the Post and folks at the Post for helping him out. But she does say at one point that she spoke with the man who wrote the book, right? So Smith suggests that it's possible that Carstner gets the story from Bancroft originally, and it really was her. We don't know. we don't know. And I think it's kind of fun. I'm not sure it matters who came up with the story, right? Carolyn Bancroft would argue otherwise, I suspect. But at the end of the day, it's is this story something that is sort of inevitable? It's certainly very romantic. During Tabor's lifetime, as his fortunes start to wane, the Matchless Mine is the mine that kind of keeps him afloat for a long time. He's attached to it. He doesn't own it at the time that he dies, so he couldn't have necessarily bequeathed it to Lizzie. But despite that, she does go up to Leadville reasonably soon after his death, and she spends quite a lot of time up there trying to make it work. She's always looking for investors. She's protecting the property with a shotgun. She is trying to make the Matchless provide for her. She does keep this sort of vigil by outward appearances around the Matchless, and the fact that she dies there as well is really compelling, and it makes for a really good story. So whether Carstner came up with it first or Bancroft came up with it first, maybe we would have gotten there anyway in the end. I don't know, but it is really interesting, and it's fun. It's fun that even with written history, we don't always have clear answers. The Tabor story is one of those things where there just aren't a lot of clear answers as well. We'll get into that more later in later episodes, but Duane Smith's biography of Horace Tabor talks quite a bit about that the tricky part about writing about the Tabors at all is that so much in their lifetime was sensationalized. You've got Eugene Field writing stories about Tabor saying, what did Shakespeare ever do for Denver, right? There's all these things, there's so much you have to sift through. And then even later, after their deaths, after Lizzie's death in particular, there's troves and troves of papers, but a lot of them end up sealed. There were some powerful folks in Denver that didn't want the contents of those papers being public just yet. And so, Lizzie dies in 1935. Historians don't really have broad access to those Tabor papers until the 60s. And by that time, some things have been destroyed, some things have been lost, some things have been archived in weird ways, things have ended up in the hands of private collectors. So the story remains muddled even to this day, even almost a century after Lizzie Tabor's death. And I think that's part of why the Tabor story continues to compel us. As Judy Nolte Temple points out, the Tabor story is folklore. It's folklore for the West. It's folklore for America. It's folklore for Coloradans. These people were real, and they lived, and they had real lives, and they had real sorrows. But the telling of their story has become cyclical and folkloric in its nature, and I think that's an interesting thing that will be worth digging into a bit more later on as well. Anyway, hold on to the matchless.